Welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. Wonderful to have you here today. We're truly grateful for your continued support. Tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? Big city? Small town? We'd love to know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations and Fractures. Chris Monroe gripped the construction plans in his calloused hands, studying the intricate details of Monroe Construction's latest project. The morning sun illuminated his office at the Monroe family estate, where generations of his family had built their legacy. At 35, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his position through merit rather than mere inheritance. "Mr. Monroe, your father's here to see you," his assistant Sarah announced through the intercom. "Send him in," Chris replied, rolling up the blueprints. Howard Ellison Monroe strode into the office, his presence commanding respect despite his advancing years. "That's the community center project?" he asked, nodding toward the plans. "Yes, we're finalizing the foundation specifications. The soil composition presents some challenges, but nothing we can't handle." Chris pulled out another set of drawings. "Take a look at these structural modifications I'm proposing." Howard examined the plans, his weathered face breaking into a proud smile. "You've always had an eye for this, son. Even as a kid, you'd spend hours with me at construction sites while Neil—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Speaking of Neil, have you seen the latest marketing proposals?" Chris asked, his jaw tightening slightly. "The budget seems inflated." "Your brother has his own way of doing things," Howard replied diplomatically. "Perhaps you should discuss it with him directly." "I've tried." He deflects, makes excuses about market research and focus groups. Chris stood, pacing behind his desk. "The numbers don't add up, Dad. Something's off." A knock interrupted their conversation. Neil Monroe entered without waiting for a response, his designer suit and perfectly styled hair a stark contrast to Chris's more practical attire. "Family meeting without me?" Neil's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I just had lunch with the mayor. He's excited about the community center project. We were discussing the marketing budget," Chris stated flatly. "Care to explain why we need $100,000 for market penetration analysis?" Neil waved dismissively. "You wouldn't understand. Marketing isn't just about putting up billboards anymore. We need sophisticated data analytics, focus groups, social media campaigns." "I understand numbers just fine," Chris cut in. "What I don't understand is why our marketing expenses have tripled since you took over the department." "Boys," Howard intervened, "this isn't the time. We have the charity gala tonight. Your mother expects both of you there, presenting a united front." Chris noticed Neil checking his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. "Hot date tonight, little brother?" "Just coordinating with Renee about the gala presentations," Neil replied smoothly. "She's been instrumental in organizing everything." The mention of his wife made Chris pause. Renee had been spending more time at the office lately, claiming the charity event needed her attention. He'd been so consumed with the community center project that he hadn't given it much thought. "How is Renee?" Howard asked. "We've missed her at Sunday dinners." "Busy," Chris replied shortly. "The gala's taken up a lot of her time." Neil's phone buzzed again. "Speaking of which, I should head back to marketing. We're finalizing the presentation slides." He slipped out before Chris could press him further about the budget. Howard watched him leave, then turned to his eldest son. "Don't be too hard on him, Chris. Not everyone has your dedication to the technical side of the business. This isn't about technical versus creative, Dad. Something's not right. I can feel it." Later that afternoon, Chris walked through the marketing department, nodding to employees who hurriedly looked away. Through the glass walls of Neil's office, he saw his brother and Renee huddled over a laptop, their heads close together. They were laughing about something, and Renee's hand lingered on Neil's shoulder longer than necessary. Chris stood there, watching, as an uncomfortable feeling settled in his gut. He thought back to their childhood, to the times he and Neil had been inseparable. When had things changed? When had his brother become a stranger? His phone vibrated. A text from Randall Mosley, the family accountant. "Need to discuss some irregularities in the marketing department's expense reports. Urgent." Chris typed back. "My office, 30 minutes." He took one last look at Neil's office. Renee was gathering her things, still smiling at whatever joke they'd shared. She didn't notice him standing there, didn't look his way as she left. The foundation of trust Chris had built his life upon was beginning to crack, hairline fractures spreading through the careful construction of his world. But unlike the buildings he raised from the ground up, he couldn't simply reinforce these weakening supports with steel and concrete. In his office, Chris pulled up the company's financial records on his computer. Numbers didn't lie. People did. And he was going to find out exactly what his brother and wife were trying to hide. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Mosley is here to see you. Send him in." Chris straightened in his chair, preparing himself for whatever revelations were about to come. He was Howard Monroe's son, after all. And Howard Monroe had taught him that in business, as in life, you had to face problems head-on. The door opened, and Randall entered, clutching a thick folder of documents. One look at the accountant's face told Chris everything he needed to know. His instincts had been right. Something was very wrong at Monroe Construction, and he was going to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. "Close the door, Randall," Chris commanded, his voice hard with determination. "Show me everything." Chapter 2. The Catalyst of Collapse. The morning of the community center groundbreaking ceremony dawned bright and clear. Chris adjusted his tie in his office mirror, his mind racing through the day's schedule. The past few weeks had been a blur of suspicious activities and mounting evidence, but today needed to be perfect. Monroe Construction's reputation depended on it. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Randall Mosley entered, his usual neat appearance slightly disheveled. "Mr. Monroe, I've found something you need to see." He placed a stack of papers on the desk. "These are expense reports from the marketing department's recent hotel bookings." Chris picked up the documents, scanning the dates and locations. "The Riverside Inn? That's 40 miles from here. Why would they need—" He stopped, his hand tightening on the paper until it crumpled. "There's more," Randall continued. "The charges appear twice, once under business expenses and again under client entertainment. Double billing the company while trying to hide the actual dates of stay. How long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months that I can trace definitively. But there are patterns going back further." Chris slammed the papers down. "Give me everything. Every receipt, every charge, every time they've—" He cut himself off, taking a deep breath. "The ceremony starts in an hour. We'll deal with this afterward." At the construction site, local media had gathered to document the groundbreaking. Howard stood proudly at the podium, addressing the crowd about Monroe Construction's commitment to community development. Chris scanned the audience, his gaze falling on Neil and Renee near the refreshment table. They stood too close together, sharing what appeared to be an inside joke. Neil's hand brushed against Renee's lower back in a gesture that seemed unconsciously intimate. Chris watched as his wife leaned in to whisper something in his brother's ear, her lips nearly touching Neil's skin. "Mr. Monroe?" A reporter approached Chris with a microphone. "Can you tell us about the innovative features planned for the community center?" Chris forced himself to focus, slipping into his professional persona. "The design incorporates sustainable materials and energy-efficient systems that will serve as a model for future development in Willow Creek." Throughout his interview, he kept Neil and Renee in his peripheral vision. They had moved slightly apart now, maintaining a show of professional distance, but their body language told a different story, one of shared secrets and hidden desires. The ceremony concluded with the official groundbreaking, photographs of city officials and Monroe Construction executives wielding golden shovels. Chris posed for the cameras, gritting his teeth through forced smiles. Later that evening, he sat in their bedroom, waiting for Renee. When she finally came home, her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly mussed. "The ceremony went well," she said, avoiding his eyes as she removed her jewelry. "Everyone seemed impressed with the presentation." "I saw you today," Chris said quietly. "With Neil." Renee froze for a moment, then continued her bedtime routine. "We were working. The marketing team." "Don't." Chris's voice cut through her excuses like a blade. "Your phone. Give it to me." "What? That's ridiculous. I'm not going to." "The software update last week. It backed up your messages." He stood, advancing toward her. "All of them, Renee. Every single one." The color drained from her face. Chris, I can explain. Explain what? The hotel rooms? The late-night meetings? His laugh was hollow. The messages about how much you love him. How I don't understand you like he does. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. He pulled out his phone, opening a document. May 15th, Riverside Inn. June 3rd, Lakeview Hotel. July 21st. Stop it. Tears streamed down her face now. You're acting crazy. Crazy? Chris's voice remained deadly calm. Crazy is betraying your husband with his own brother. Crazy is stealing from the company to fund your little romance. We never meant to. To what? Get caught? He moved closer, towering over her. How long, Renee? How long have you been sleeping with my brother? She backed away until she hit the wall. Please, Chris. We can work this out. We can get counseling, try to... There's nothing to work out. He turned away from her, disgust evident in every movement. Pack your things. Get out of my house. You can't just throw me out. I have rights. Rights? He spun back around, his expression terrible in its intensity. You want to talk about rights? Fine. Let's talk about them tomorrow, in the company boardroom, with our lawyers present. I'm sure the board will be very interested in hearing about how you and Neil have been embezzling funds. You wouldn't dare. It would destroy the company's reputation. Try me. His voice was ice. 1 hour, Renee. Anything you leave behind gets thrown out. He stalked from the room, ignoring her sobs. In his study, he poured himself a drink and made a call. Randall? Execute Protocol Alpha. Full audit of the marketing department, effective immediately. And contact our attorneys first thing in the morning. He paused, staring at the family photos on his desk. One more thing, call security. Have them revoke Neil and Renee's access to all Monroe construction properties. Tonight. The next morning, Chris sat in the boardroom, flanked by the company's legal team. Howard and Geraldine sat at the far end, their faces drawn with shock and grief. When Neil and Renee entered, they found armed security guards stationed at the doors. What is this? Neil demanded, trying to maintain his usual confident demeanor. Chris nodded to Randall, who distributed thick folders to everyone present. This, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, is evidence of your betrayal, both personal and professional. As the board members opened their folders, gasps and murmurs filled the room. Neil's face went pale as he realized the extent of the documentation: bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages, surveillance photos. You had us followed? Renee whispered, horrified. I protected my interests. Chris remained seated, emanating cold authority. Which is more than I can say for either of you. You were too busy playing boss, Neil sneered, but his voice shook slightly. Renee needed someone who could keep up with her ambitions. Ambitions? Chris raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call stealing from our family's company? You never understood me, Renee added, grabbing Neil's hand defiantly. You were content to let life pass you by while we built something real. Howard slammed his hand on the table. Something real? You've destroyed this family. Both of you. The board will vote this afternoon on your immediate termination, Chris announced, his tone businesslike. Criminal charges are being considered. But first, he pulled out one final document. Renee, you'll find divorce papers in front of you. Sign them, and if I refuse, then I'll ensure every hotel, every restaurant, every place you two used company money to conduct your affair becomes public record. His smile was razor-sharp. I'm sure your social circle would love to hear those details. Silence fell over the boardroom as Renee picked up the pen with trembling fingers. Neil watched helplessly as she signed away her marriage, her position, her reputation. Get out, Chris commanded when she finished. Both of you. Security will escort you from the building. As they were led away, Geraldine burst into tears. Howard moved to comfort his wife, looking years older than he had that morning. Son, he began, but Chris cut him off. The community center project needs my attention. He stood, straightening his tie. Randall, have legal prepare statements for the press. Keep it professional. Corporate restructuring, mutual separation, nothing more. He walked out of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing through the halls of the building his ancestors had built. The foundation of his life had crumbled, but he would rebuild it, stronger, harder, without room for weakness or betrayal. In his office, he looked out over the city his family had helped shape. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You'll regret this, brother. We're not finished." Chris deleted the message without responding. They were finished. He would make sure of it. Chapter 3. The Crucible of Resilience. 6 weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Chris sat alone in his office at midnight, surrounded by project files and financial reports. The betrayal had transformed his workspace into a command center for damage control. Spreadsheets covered his desk, each one revealing another layer of Neil and Renee's deception. A knock interrupted his concentration. Randall Mosley entered, carrying a fresh stack of documents. "More irregularities?" Chris asked, not looking up from his computer. "Different this time." Randall placed a folder in front of him. "They've started a competing firm. Already secured 3 contracts that were supposed to be ours." Chris opened the folder, scanning the contents. "They're undercutting our bids by 20%. How?" "That's not all." Randall shifted uncomfortably. "Renee's pregnant." The pen in Chris's hand snapped, spraying ink across the documents. He stood abruptly, turning to face the window. "How far along?" "For months, according to the medical records our investigators found." Simple math told him what he needed to know. The child had been conceived while he and Renee were still married, while she was sleeping in their bed, making plans for their future together. "Mr. Monroe?" Randall's voice was hesitant. "There's something else. They've been contacting our suppliers, trying to negotiate exclusive contracts." "Let them try." Chris turned back, his expression hardened. "Get me a meeting with the board tomorrow morning. It's time to implement some changes." After Randall left, Chris called an unexpected ally. "Ms. Little? I need your expertise on something urgent." Beatrice Little, corporate attorney and recent addition to his inner circle, arrived within the hour. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case. "Corporate espionage," she said, reviewing the files. "Plus breach of contract, violation of non-compete clauses. We can bury them in litigation." "Not enough." Chris paced the room. "They're using our own playbook against us. Neil knows our strategies, our weaknesses. Then we change the game." Beatrice pulled out her laptop. "Your company's bylaws give the CEO extraordinary powers during times of crisis. We can use that to restructure operations, implement new security protocols." They worked through the night, crafting a strategy that would protect Monroe Construction while systematically dismantling Neil and Renee's attempts at competition. By dawn, Chris had a clear path forward. The board meeting that morning was brief but productive. Chris presented evidence of corporate espionage, then outlined his plan for restructuring. The vote was unanimous in his favor. Effective immediately, he announced, all departments will undergo security audits. New confidentiality agreements will be required. Anyone found sharing company information with outside parties will face immediate termination and legal action. One board member raised his hand. "What about the rumors?" "About Neil and Renee. My personal life is not up for discussion." Chris's tone left no room for argument. "Focus on protecting this company's interests. That's what you're paid for." Later that week, Chris met with Trudy Ryder, a prominent interior designer recommended by one of his clients. Her reputation for transforming spaces matched his need for change. "The office needs a complete overhaul," he explained, leading her through the building. "Something that reflects strength, innovation." Trudy studied the space with a professional eye. "And what about your home?" "A man's environment shapes his mindset." Chris hesitated. He hadn't changed anything in the house since Renee left, letting the rooms gather dust like museum exhibits of his failed marriage. "Start with the office," he decided. "The house can wait." But Trudy proved persistent. Over the next few weeks, as she transformed the corporate headquarters with clean lines and bold designs, she gradually drew Chris into conversations about personal renewal. "Your workspace reflects your vision," she observed one evening as they reviewed material samples. "But where do you find peace when the workday ends?" Her question struck deeper than she probably intended. Peace had become a foreign concept, replaced by an all-consuming drive for success and vindication. That night, Chris returned home to find his parents waiting in the driveway. Howard looked grim, Geraldine worried. "We need to talk," Howard said as Chris let them in. "About the future of the company. If this is about Neil, it's about you." Geraldine touched his arm. "You're working yourself to death, sweetheart. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" "I'm fine." Chris moved away from her touch. "The company needs me focused right now." "The company needs you healthy," Howard countered. "And thinking clearly. This vendetta against your brother." "Vendetta?" Chris laughed harshly. "He destroyed my marriage, stole from our company, and now he's trying to ruin everything we've built. This isn't a vendetta, Dad. This is survival." "And what about your survival?" Geraldine's voice cracked. "You're not eating, barely sleeping. The hatred is consuming you. Hatred keeps me sharp." Chris poured himself a drink. "It keeps me from making the same mistakes again. Trust, forgiveness. Those are luxuries we can't afford anymore." Howard stepped forward. "Son, we're not asking you to forgive them. What they did was unforgivable. But don't let their betrayal destroy who you are." "Who I am?" Chris set down his glass carefully. "I'm your son, a Monroe. And Monroes protect what's theirs. Isn't that what you taught me?" "I taught you to be strong," Howard agreed. "But strength without wisdom becomes tyranny." The words hung in the air between them. Chris turned away, staring out the window at the gardens Renee had once tended. They were overgrown now, wild and untamed. "I have a meeting with Randall tomorrow morning," he said finally. "A complete audit of all company projects from the past 5 years. We need to identify any potential vulnerabilities before Neil can exploit them." His parents exchanged defeated looks. They lost him to his mission of revenge, at least for now. After they left, Chris walked through the empty house. Each room held memories he needed to exorcise. In the study, he found an old photo album. Pictures of him and Neil as children, playing in their father's construction sites. School graduations. Family vacations. He closed the album without looking further. The past was dead. Only the future mattered now. A future he would build on his own terms, without the weakness of trust or the burden of brotherhood. His phone buzzed with a text from Trudy. "Reviewed the design proposals. Ready to start the renovation whenever you are." Chris looked around his haunted house and made a decision. "Both office and home," he texted back. "Clean slate. No reminders of the past." He spent the rest of the night in his home office, reviewing documents Randall had prepared. Each page revealed new betrayals, new challenges to overcome. But with every revelation, his resolve strengthened. Neil and Renee thought they could build their happiness on the ruins of his trust. He would show them how wrong they were. Monroe Construction would not just survive their betrayal. It would emerge stronger, harder, unassailable. And Chris Monroe would never again be vulnerable to the weakness of love or the illusion of loyalty. Chapter 4. Strategic Alliances and Hidden Agendas. Chris Monroe tapped his pen against the polished conference table at the Willow Creek Chamber of Commerce meeting. His attention wasn't on the speaker discussing local business development, but rather on Beatrice Little, the sharp-suited corporate attorney presenting statistics on recent litigation trends. Her reputation for ruthlessly dismantling opposing counsel preceded her. "Thank you for your attention," Beatrice concluded, gathering her materials. "Any questions?" The room rustled with movement as attendees began networking. Chris remained in his seat, watching Beatrice deflect attempts at small talk with practiced efficiency. When the crowd thinned, he approached. "Ms. Little, your analysis of predatory business practices was fascinating." She studied him with calculating eyes. "Mr. Monroe, I followed your company's recent situation with interest. Have dinner with me," he said. "Professionally. I have a proposition that might intrigue you." 2 hours later, they sat in a private booth at La Maison, Willow Creek's finest restaurant. Beatrice cut straight to the point between bites of coq au vin. "You want revenge," she stated. "But you need it to be legal, sustainable, and absolute." "I want justice," Chris corrected, though his tight grip on his wine glass betrayed his emotions. "My brother and ex-wife think they can build their success on stolen foundations, and you want to demolish those foundations." Beatrice's lips curved in appreciation. Tell me about their vulnerabilities. Chris pulled out a folder. Neil's new company relies heavily on three major suppliers. Without them, his projects grind to a halt. Acquisition targets, Beatrice mused, scanning the documents. But they'll see you coming. Not if we use shell corporations and third-party buyers. I'm willing to liquidate personal assets to fund it. Beatrice's eyes glinted. Better. Who handles your PR? We don't have a dedicated team. Why? Because we need to control the narrative. I know someone, Candace Hansen at Willow Creek Lifestyle. She's ambitious, hungry for bigger stories than charity galas and home renovations. Set up a meeting, Chris decided. And Beatrice? Money is no object. I want them destroyed. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of covert meetings and careful preparation. Randall Mosley proved invaluable, providing detailed financial analysis of potential acquisition targets. Each morning, Chris received updates on Neil and Renee's business activities, their client meetings, their attempts to secure new contracts. They're planning a major housing development, Randall reported one evening. Luxury condos on the east side. Who's financing it? First National seems interested. They're meeting tomorrow to discuss terms. Chris smiled coldly. Call Gerald Matthews at First National. Remind him who financed his brother's restaurant chain when no one else would take the risk. The next day, Neil and Renee emerged from First National looking shaken. The pattern repeated across town. Banks suddenly became hesitant. Investors developed cold feet. Beatrice orchestrated each setback through a web of business relationships and carefully timed revelations. Candace Hansen proved to be a masterful ally. Her first article appeared in Willow Creek Lifestyle, Innovation or Imitation, the fine line between inspiration and theft in local architecture. Without naming names, she raised pointed questions about originality and professional ethics that had Neil's potential clients whispering. They're getting desperate, Randall reported after monitoring their financial transactions. Neil tried to access his trust fund yesterday, which has been frozen pending the fraud investigation, Beatrice added with satisfaction. They're running out of options. Chris leaned back in his chair, reviewing their progress. The supplier acquisitions were proceeding quietly through various shell companies. Banking relationships were being systematically severed. The media was turning against them. But it wasn't enough. We need to accelerate, he declared. Beatrice, prepare the documentation for a hostile takeover. Randall, identify their weakest subcontractors, ones who might be willing to share information about cut corners and safety violations. That's aggressive, Beatrice warned. They'll fight back. Let them. Chris's voice was steel. I've been building this trap for months. It's time to spring it. The team worked late into the night, piecing together their strategy. As Beatrice reviewed legal documents and Randall compiled financial data, Chris received an unexpected call. Mr. Monroe? This is Trevor Ross from the building inspector's office. We've received some concerning reports about projects handled by your brother's company. Really? Chris's tone was neutral. That sounds serious. Very. We'll need to conduct thorough inspections. Multiple sites. Of course. Public safety is paramount. Chris muted the phone and smiled at his team. The dominoes are falling. By month's end, Neil and Renee's company faced investigations from 3 regulatory agencies. Their suppliers, now secretly controlled by Chris, began raising prices and extending delivery times. Clients grew wary, contracts were canceled. They're calling it a witch hunt, Candace reported over lunch. Playing the victims. Then let's give them something real to complain about, Chris replied. How's that investigation into their project safety records coming along? Nearly ready. The evidence from those subcontractors is damning. When this hits, their reputation will be radioactive. The pieces were in place. Chris stood at his office window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, his brother and ex-wife still thought they could win, still believed they could escape consequences. He would teach them otherwise. His phone buzzed. A message from Beatrice. Takeover documents ready. Board meeting scheduled for next week. Chris typed back. Proceed. Then he poured himself a drink and smiled. The real battle was about to begin. Chapter 5. The Counterattack and Rising Tensions. The annual Willow Creek Business Symposium buzzed with anticipation. Neil and Renee stood at the podium, presenting their revolutionary housing development to hundreds of industry professionals. Neil's confidence radiated as he clicked through polished slides. Our design philosophy prioritizes innovative living spaces, he declared, gesturing to architectural renderings. Each element carefully crafted to. A murmur rippled through the audience as phones lit up with notifications. Candace Hansen's latest exposé had just gone live, Stolen Dreams. The truth behind Willow Creek's newest development. Neil faltered mid-sentence as attendees began reading. The article detailed how the development's designs had been copied from confidential Monroe construction documents. Side-by-side comparisons left no room for doubt. These allegations are baseless, Neil protested, but his voice cracked. We have documentation. Indeed you do. Beatrice Little's voice cut through the chaos as she stood. Documentation stolen from Monroe construction servers. Would you like me to share the access logs? The live stream captured crisis unfolding in real time. Investors rose and walked out. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Renee grabbed Neil's arm, whispering urgently, but the microphones caught her words. We need to leave. Now. Their hasty exit became fodder for local news. Within hours, social media exploded with memes of their retreat. Neil's attempted defense, a rambling Facebook post accusing Chris of corporate sabotage, backfired spectacularly when Beatrice released evidence of their own illegal activities. They're planning something, Randall warned Chris that evening. Neil withdrew significant cash from their accounts this morning. Let them thrash, Chris replied, reviewing surveillance photos. Each move they make digs their grave deeper. Renee launched their counteroffensive through a carefully orchestrated charity campaign. She organized a gala benefiting women's shelters, positioning herself as a victim of corporate bullying. Local media covered her tearful speech about powerful men abusing their positions. Chris's response came within hours. Monroe Construction announced a major affordable housing initiative. The project, designed in partnership with Trudy Ryder, would provide homes for hundreds of low-income families. The contrast between Renee's luxury condos and Chris's community-focused development dominated headlines. Your brother's trying to turn your parents against you, Beatrice reported. He showed them documents suggesting you're using company resources for personal vengeance. Have our investigators found anything in their financial records? Better. Beatrice smiled grimly. We traced wire transfers from the family trust to offshore accounts. Neil's been embezzling for months. The evidence shattered Neil's remaining credibility with their parents. Howard and Geraldine, confronted with proof of their younger son's theft, withdrew their support completely. Neil's desperation grew visible. During a key supplier meeting, he discovered Monroe Construction had acquired control through shell companies. His attempt to find alternate suppliers failed as word spread about missed payments and broken contracts. Their cash reserves are almost depleted, Randall reported. They've started selling personal assets. Press harder, Chris commanded. I want them feeling pressure from directions. The pressure mounted at a crucial city council meeting. Both companies presented competing project proposals. Neil's presentation derailed when council members received anonymous tips about safety violations at his previous developments. These accusations are outrageous, Neil shouted, lunging at a council member who questioned his integrity. Security intervened as cameras rolled. Renee attempted damage control through back channels. Her representative approached Beatrice with an offer. Merge the companies, share control, end the war. Tell her, Chris instructed Beatrice, that she can dissolve their company and surrender all assets, or face complete destruction. No negotiation. The rejection drove them to increasingly desperate measures. Neil was caught on camera threatening a building inspector. Renee's public appearances became erratic, marked by emotional outbursts and incoherent accusations. They've lost 3 major clients this week, Randall updated. Their project financing is collapsing. Chris watched their downfall from his office, remembering the betrayal that started it all. His revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about justice, about showing the world that actions had consequences. The final blow came unexpectedly. A routine insurance audit revealed systematic fraud in Neil's completed projects. False claims, inflated costs, faked inspections. The evidence mounted into an irrefutable case. The regulatory agencies are moving in, Beatrice announced. Multiple investigations, possible criminal charges. Perfect. Chris turned from his window. Prepare the takeover documents. It's time to end this. Chapter 6, The Gathering Storm. Chris studied the takeover documents spread across his desk, each page a carefully crafted instrument of destruction. Beatrice had outdone herself. The terms appeared generous while stripping Neil and Renee of any meaningful control or assets. The timing is crucial, Beatrice explained, highlighting key sections. We move when their main loan payment comes due. Their lender is on board? Fully. She smiled. Amazing how cooperative banks become when presented with evidence of fraud. The plan executed with precision. Neil received the takeover offer the same morning his lender called in their loans. His desperate call to their lawyer ended quickly. No firm would touch his toxic case. Mr. Monroe, his secretary buzzed. Your brother's here. He's demanding to see you. Security team in place? Yes, sir. And the recording equipment is active. Send him in. Neil burst through the door, face contorted with rage. You manipulative bastard. You think you can steal my company? Steal? Chris raised an eyebrow. Like you stole my wife? My clients? My trust? That was different. Renee and I love each other. You were ignoring her, focused only on work. And now I'm focused on you. Chris's voice could have frozen fire. How's that working out? Neil slammed his fists on the desk. I'll fight this. I'll expose your schemes, your corporate espionage. Interesting choice of words. Chris pressed a button, and screens lit up with surveillance footage. Like this scheme? You, bribing city officials? Or these construction sites where you cut corners to save money? The color drained from Neil's face. You've been watching us? I've been hunting you. And now? Chris stood slowly. I've won. Security arrived to escort Neil out, his threats echoing down the hallway. Randall entered as they left, carrying fresh reports. Their investors are pulling out. Stock values plummeting. And he hesitated. Renee's tried accessing her old files at the office. Looking for leverage? Chris laughed coldly. She'll find nothing. I purged her access months ago. The next days brought increasing desperation from their camp. Neil attempted to rally support at an emergency board meeting, presenting manufactured evidence of market manipulation. His performance ended spectacularly when Randall played audio recordings of his kickback schemes with suppliers. Renee tried a different approach, filing for emergency custody rights over their child. Her petition painted Chris as an obsessed ex-husband destroying their lives out of spite. The court saw through it, Beatrice reported. Especially after the psychological evaluation showed the child's distress stemmed from their behavior, not yours. Where are they living now? That mansion they bought? Randall checked his notes. In foreclosure. They've been trying to sell assets, but our legal holds have frozen most accounts. Chris implemented the next phase. Operation Phoenix. Monroe Construction began acquiring Neil's failed projects at bargain prices, announcing plans for rehabilitation and community improvement. Each press release highlighted the contrast between their approaches, cementing public opinion. Neil's response shocked even Chris. Anonymous threats reached Monroe Construction employees, suggesting criminal connections. But Chris had anticipated this. His security team, led by Gabriel Moore, intercepted and documented each attempt. Your brother's meeting with known criminals, Gabriel reported. Want us to intervene? Monitor and record, Chris ordered. Add it to the evidence pile. Renee's public unraveling provided its own ammunition. At a charity auction, she verbally attacked a donor questioning their finances. The viral video showed her transformation from polished professional to raving desperado. The remaining investors are jumping ship, Randall confirmed. Their company's effectively dead. But Chris wasn't finished. He expanded Monroe Construction's community programs, creating opportunities in areas Neil had exploited. Local politicians, recognizing the shifting winds, aligned themselves with his initiatives. Then Beatrice delivered the coup de grace, comprehensive evidence of insurance fraud. The documentation detailed years of systematic deception, with both Neil and Renee's signatures on falsified claims. Federal investigators are interested, she said. This goes beyond civil courts now. Chris reviewed the evidence package. Each page represented another nail in their coffin, another step toward complete destruction of their lives and reputations. Winter descended on Willow Creek, matching the frozen wasteland of Neil and Renee's future. Their attempts to flee justice were thwarted by Chris's foresight, travel alerts, frozen accounts, watchful eyes at ports and airports. The final board meeting approached. Chris stood in his renovated office, surveying the empire he'd protected and strengthened. Neil and Renee had tried to take everything from him. Instead, they'd given him the motivation to become more powerful than ever. "Sir?" His assistant interrupted his thoughts. "The board members are arriving." "Good." Chris straightened his tie, ready to end this chapter of his life. It's time to show them what real power looks like. Chapter 7. The Turning Point. Monroe Construction's headquarters buzzed with anticipation as board members filed into the newly renovated conference room. Howard Monroe gripped the podium, his knuckles white, while Geraldine sat rigid in her chair. The tension thickened as Neil and Renee slipped in through the back door, taking seats near the exit. "This meeting will come to order," Howard announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades of leadership. He glanced at Chris, who gave a subtle nod. "Today marks a pivotal moment in our company's history." Neil leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. Renee touched his arm, both of them confident in their position despite recent setbacks. Their arrogance would be their undoing. After extensive consultation with our legal team, Howard continued, "I am implementing an immediate change in leadership structure." He pulled out a document. "Effective immediately, all company assets and control transfer to Chris Monroe." The smirk vanished from Neil's face. "What?" He jumped to his feet. "You can't do this." "Sit down, Mr. Monroe." Beatrice Little's command cut through his protest. She approached the board table, spreading documents before each member. "These papers detail the transfer of ownership. All legal requirements have been met." "This is a coup." Neil's face reddened. "He's manipulating you, Dad. Can't you see what he's doing?" Howard's expression hardened. "I see perfectly well what everyone has done. The evidence speaks for itself." Randall Mosley stepped forward, carrying a thick binder. "Shall I outline the financial discrepancies we've uncovered, Mr. Neil? The fraudulent contracts? The embezzled funds?" "Those records were confidential." Renee burst out, then caught herself too late. "So you admit they exist?" Beatrice pounced on the slip. "Interesting choice of defense, Mrs. Monroe." Chris watched the scene unfold, his face impassive. He'd orchestrated this moment down to the smallest detail. Each player positioned exactly where they needed to be. Neil tried a different tactic. "Think about what you're doing to the family name." "The scandal." "The scandal you created?" Chris finally spoke, his voice deadly quiet. "When you stole my wife, when you undermined this company, when you betrayed everything our parents built, you drove her away." Neil shouted. "You were too focused on work, too blind to see." "Enough." Chris cut him off. "Your theatrics won't work here. The board has seen the evidence. The vote is final." Security guards materialized at the doors as Beatrice distributed more documents. "These detail the terms of your immediate termination and the dissolution of your competing business interests." "You can't just erase us." Renee protested. "We have rights." "Rights?" Chris laughed coldly. "Like the right to steal company secrets? To endanger lives with substandard construction? To defraud investors? Those are lies." Neil lunged forward, but security intercepted him. "Mr. Mosley," Chris nodded to Randall, who activated a projection screen. Video evidence played. Neil accepting bribes, Renee falsifying inspection documents, both of them plotting in secret meetings. "We've documented everything," Chris continued as their faces drained of color. "The authorities are very interested in your creative approach to building codes." The board members watched in horrified fascination as more evidence appeared on screen. Howard and Geraldine looked away, unable to witness their younger son's disgrace. "This isn't over," Neil snarled as security began escorting them out. "You think you've won? You've got nothing." Chris stood, towering over the table. "I have everything. The company, our parents' respect, a clear conscience." His voice dropped lower. "What do you have, brother?" A crumbling business built on lies? A relationship founded on betrayal? Renee tried one last desperate gambit. The child. You wouldn't separate. Your custody hearing is next week, Beatrice interrupted smoothly. The judge will be very interested in the psychological evaluation results. They were half-dragged from the room, their threats and protests echoing down the hallway. Through the windows, camera flashes announced Candace Hansen's media presence, ready to document their downfall. Chris addressed the remaining board members. Let's discuss the company's future. He activated a presentation. I've prepared a detailed restructuring plan. The meeting proceeded efficiently, but beneath his professional demeanor, Chris savored each moment. Years of planning, months of strategic moves, all culminating in this perfect execution of justice. Outside, Neil and Renee faced a media firestorm. Their desperate attempts to spin the situation only dug them deeper as reporters fired questions about the emerging evidence of their crimes. Inside, Chris built the foundation of Monroe Construction's new era. Each decision, each policy change, another brick in the wall between past and future. He'd torn down their illusions of victory and built something stronger from the ruins. The sun set on Willow Creek as the meeting concluded. Howard and Geraldine lingered, struggling with their role in their son's war. It had to be done, Chris told them quietly. The company comes first. Family loyalty must be earned. They nodded, understanding at last that their younger son had forced this outcome through his own choices. The parents who left the building that evening were different from those who had entered, harder, wiser, finally seeing the truth about both their sons. Chapter 8. The Web Titans. Beatrice's heels clicked against marble as she strode into Chris's office. The federal agents just left Neil's house. They seized everything: computers, phones, files, and Chris didn't look up from his laptop. They found more than we expected. Neil wasn't just cutting corners on local projects. He'd set up shell companies to launder money through international contracts. Now Chris looked up, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Send everything to our contacts at the SEC. Already done. Beatrice placed a USB drive on his desk. But there's more. Renee's been embezzling from her women's shelter charity, using donations to fund their lifestyle. Perfect. Chris pressed a button on his intercom. Get me Candace Hansen. Within hours, news vans surrounded Neil and Renee's mansion. Federal agents carried out box after box of evidence while reporters shouted questions. Through his office window, Chris watched the live stream on multiple screens. Sir, his assistant interrupted. Mr. Mosley needs to see you immediately. Randall rushed in, clutching printouts. They're trying to transfer assets offshore. I caught the transactions just in time. Block everything, Chris commanded. Lock down their accounts, freeze their credit lines. I want them desperate. Already done. Randall's fingers flew over his tablet. But Neil made a call to some questionable people in the city. Our surveillance team picked it up. Let me guess, trying to hire muscle? Worse. He's offering to expose safety violations in our older projects if we don't back off. Chris's laugh held no humor. Send in Gabriel. Gabriel Moore entered silently, his military bearing evident in his stance. Sir? Neil's making threats. Show him why that's a mistake. With pleasure. Gabriel pulled out his phone, dispatching orders to his security team. Within hours, Neil's desperate gambit backfired. His hired thugs were arrested in a sting operation, their phones containing recorded evidence of his solicitation to commit crimes. Each threat he'd made became another weapon in Chris's arsenal. Renee attempted damage control through a tearful TV interview. Chris is destroying our family out of spite, she pleaded. He never understood what real love means. The broadcast cut off mid-sentence as evidence of her charity fraud hit the news. Videos surfaced showing her using donation money at luxury spas, high-end restaurants, exclusive boutiques. Their lawyer quit, Beatrice reported later that day. No one will represent them now. What about the custody hearing? Scheduled for tomorrow. The psychological evaluation results are devastating. The child shows clear signs of trauma from their erratic behavior. Chris nodded. Make sure Howard and Geraldine are prepared to take temporary custody. The hearing proved brutal. Neil and Renee's facades cracked under questioning. Their attempts to paint Chris as the villain dissolved when evidence of their neglect emerged. Missed doctor appointments, unexplained absences, witnesses to their public fights. The court hereby grants temporary custody to Howard and Geraldine Monroe, the judge announced. Furthermore, given the pending criminal charges, all visitation must be supervised. Renee's scream echoed through the courthouse. Neil had to be restrained by bailiffs as he lunged toward Chris, shouting threats that only strengthened the judge's decision. Back at Monroe Construction, Chris implemented the next phase. Building inspectors descended on all of Neil's completed projects, armed with anonymous tips about specific violations. The results exceeded expectations. 3 buildings evacuated so far, Randall reported. Structural issues, substandard materials, falsified safety certificates. The media's having a field day. Make sure our company handles the renovations, Chris instructed. Full price, no corners cut. Show them the difference between their methods and ours. The contrast proved devastating. Each revelation of Neil's negligence highlighted Monroe Construction's integrity. Clients flocked to Chris's company, while Neil's former customers filed lawsuits. Chapter 9. Redemption and Renewal. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. After weeks of testimony, dozens of witnesses, and mountains of evidence, justice was about to be served. In the matter of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and criminal negligence, the judge began. This court finds the defendants, Neil Monroe and Renee McNamara Monroe, guilty on all counts. Neil's face turned ashen. Renee swayed in her seat. Given the severity of these crimes, particularly the willful endangerment of public safety through substandard construction practices, this court sentences Neil Monroe to 15 years in federal prison. Gasps filled the courtroom. Neil's legs gave out, forcing him to grip the defense table. Renee McNamara Monroe, in consideration of your role as primary caregiver and cooperation with authorities, this court sentences you to 3 years house arrest with mandatory community service. Chris watched from the gallery, his expression unchanging. The sentences weren't just punishment. They were public proof of his triumph, validation of his relentless pursuit of justice. Additionally, the judge continued, the defendants are ordered to pay restitution totaling $20 million to affected parties. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Chris. How do you feel about the verdict? Justice has been served, he stated simply. Monroe Construction will continue focusing on what matters, building quality projects that benefit our community. In the following months, Chris's vision for the company expanded. The Community Center project, once tainted by Neil's betrayal, became a showcase of innovation and integrity. Local schools brought students to tour the construction site, learning about ethical business practices. Howard and Geraldine thrived in their role as guardians, providing the stability their grandchild desperately needed. The boy's nightmares decreased, his grades improved, and therapists noted significant positive changes. Chris transformed the company's culture. New policies emphasized transparency and accountability. Employee profit-sharing programs rewarded ethical behavior. The industry took notice. Monroe Construction became a model for corporate responsibility. The latest quarter's results are impressive, Randall announced during a board meeting. Our market share has doubled. Client satisfaction rates at record highs. And Neil's former clients? Chris asked. Most have signed with us. The rest are in negotiations. The company's success attracted national attention. Business magazines featured Chris's leadership style. Universities invited him to speak about corporate ethics. Each appearance reinforced his triumph over betrayal. One evening, as Chris worked late in his office, Beatrice brought news from prison. Neil tried to appeal. Failed spectacularly. He's been moved to maximum security after trying to bribe guards. And Renee? Struggling under house arrest. Her therapy sessions aren't going well. She keeps ranting about revenge. Let her. Chris turned back to his work. She has nothing left to threaten us with. The years of planning, the careful accumulation of evidence, the strategic destruction of their lives. It had all paid off. Neil and Renee's betrayal had intended to destroy him. Instead, it had forged him into something stronger, more ruthless, unshakable. His revenge wasn't just complete. It was eternal. Long after their prison terms ended, they would live as pariahs, marked by their crimes, haunted by their choices. Their son would grow up knowing their true nature, understanding why they'd lost everything. And Chris? He stood victorious atop the empire they tried to steal, his power absolute, his reputation untouchable. He transformed personal betrayal into professional triumph, emotional pain into corporate success. The moon rose over Willow Creek as Chris signed the final documents transferring Neil's remaining assets to Monroe Construction. In the end, justice wasn't about forgiveness or healing. It was about power, taking it, wielding it, using it to ensure those who betrayed you never rose again. He'd done more than survive their betrayal. He'd turned it into the foundation of his greatest victory. That was the true revenge. Not just destroying them, but using their destruction to build something greater than they could have imagined. The lights of Willow Creek sparkled below his office window, each one representing a life touched by his company's work. He'd protected those lives from Neil's negligence, turned betrayal into benefit, pain into progress. That was his legacy now. Not the broken trust or the bitter memories, but the empire built from their ashes. An empire that would stand as eternal testimony to a simple truth. Betrayal, Chris Monroe, and you didn't just lose. You ceased to exist. Epilogue. A decade later, the skyline of Willow Creek had transformed over the past 10 years. Monroe Construction's influence stretched across the city, marked by innovative buildings and community developments that had turned the once modest town into a thriving urban center. At the heart of it all stood the Monroe Tower, a 50-story testament to power and precision. Chris Monroe sat in his top-floor office, reviewing reports from his company's newest international expansion. At 48, his presence commanded even more authority than before. Success had honed his features into sharp angles, while his eyes retained their calculating intensity. "Mr. Monroe," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The board is ready for your annual address." He gathered his materials, pausing to look at the digital displays covering one wall. Each screen showed real-time data from Monroe construction projects worldwide. The company had grown exponentially, becoming a global leader in sustainable development and urban renewal. The boardroom fell silent as Chris entered. Beatrice Little, now Chief Legal Officer, sat at his right hand. A decade of shared victories had cemented their professional partnership. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency had grown alongside the company's success. "Our 10th consecutive year of record growth," Chris began, activating a holographic display. Monroe Construction now operates in 27 countries, with a market capitalization exceeding $50 billion. The numbers told only part of the story. After Neil and Renee's downfall, Chris had systematically expanded his influence beyond construction. Monroe Enterprises now included technology firms, financial institutions, and media companies, an empire built on the ashes of betrayal. "And our former competitors?" a board member asked. "There are no former competitors," Beatrice answered with a cold smile. "Only acquired assets and cautionary tales." Indeed, Neil's fate served as a warning to anyone who considered crossing Monroe Construction. Released from prison after 12 years, he lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. His attempts to rebuild his life had met systematic opposition. No construction company would hire him. No bank would fund him. His name had become synonymous with failure. Renee's story proved equally grim. Her house arrest had ended years ago, but her reputation never recovered. She worked part-time at a small marketing firm. Her former glamour faded, her social connections severed. The charity fraud conviction had made her untouchable in the nonprofit world she once dominated. Their son, James, now 17, had thrived under Howard and Geraldine's guardianship. He showed his uncle's aptitude for business, interning at Monroe Construction during summers. Chris had taken a careful interest in his education, ensuring he understood the price of betrayal through his parents' example. "Uncle Chris," James had asked during a recent meeting, "why do you still block their attempts to rebuild?" "Because actions have eternal consequences," Chris had replied. "Remember that when you take your place in this company." The lesson hadn't been lost on the teenager. James excelled in business courses, already showing signs of the Monroe ruthlessness. He maintained minimal contact with his biological parents, understanding that his future lay with the uncle who controlled the family empire. Randall Mosley had risen to chief financial officer, his early loyalty rewarded with substantial power. His financial acumen helped transform Monroe Construction from a regional player into a global force. The evidence he'd gathered against Neil and Renee had proven just the beginning of his value to the company. The Monroe Foundation's latest initiative, Randall reported to the board, has funded business ethics programs at 20 major universities. Our case study on corporate accountability has become standard teaching material. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Chris had turned his revenge into an educational tool, ensuring future business leaders understood the cost of betrayal. The program specifically highlighted Neil and Renee's downfall, their names forever linked to failure and disgrace. Trudy Ryder had expanded her influence as well. Her design firm, now a Monroe Construction subsidiary, set industry standards for sustainable architecture. The partnership had proved mutually beneficial, her creativity tempered by his strategic vision, her innovations protected by his power. The Community Center project, Trudy presented, has been designated a historical landmark. The American Institute of Architects is featuring it in their centennial exhibition on transformative urban design. The project that had marked the beginning of betrayal now stood as a monument to triumph. Each year, thousands of visitors toured the building, learning about the Monroe Construction philosophy of integrity and excellence. None of the official histories mention Neil or Renee's involvement. Candace Hansen had parlayed her coverage of the scandal into national prominence. Her media company, backed by Monroe Investments, specialized in investigative business journalism. She maintained a symbiotic relationship with Chris, her network highlighting Monroe Construction's successes while exposing competitors' weaknesses. Our latest expose on industry corruption, she reported in a private meeting, has already triggered 3 federal investigations. None involving Monroe Properties, of course. Howard and Geraldine had aged gracefully, their latter years free from family strife. They hosted weekly dinners at the Monroe estate, now attended by an inner circle of trusted allies. Neil and Renee's names were never mentioned at these gatherings, their existence erased from family photographs and conversations. Gabriel Moore's security firm had expanded into a global operation, providing protection for all Monroe enterprises. His teams monitored Neil and Renee constantly, ensuring they never gained enough resources or connections to cause trouble. Any attempt to contact former business associates met swift, decisive response. They tried reaching out to an overseas investor last month, Gabriel informed Chris. The approach was intercepted and discouraged. The message remained clear. No one in the business world would risk Monroe Construction's wrath by helping the disgraced couple. Their isolation was complete and permanent. After the board meeting, Chris visited the Monroe Construction Training Center. Hundreds of employees learned company protocols in state-of-the-art facilities. The orientation video highlighted the company's commitment to ethics, using Neil and Renee's case as a warning. Integrity isn't just a policy, Chris told a group of new hires. It's the foundation of power. Those who betray that foundation pay the price forever. The trainees absorbed his words eagerly, unaware they were hearing a personal manifesto born of betrayal. To them, Chris Monroe represented the pinnacle of business success, his path to power sanitized by time and triumph. In his private moments, Chris sometimes reviewed footage from the years of revenge. The boardroom confrontation, the court proceedings, the media coverage of Neil and Renee's downfall. Each video preserved in high definition, a digital testament to justice served. These weren't moments of weakness or regret. Rather, they reinforced his understanding of power and consequences. The betrayal that might have destroyed him had instead created something invincible, a man who turned personal pain into professional dominance. His marriage to Renee and brotherhood with Neil had died, but the lessons lived on. Trust was a weapon. Loyalty had to be enforced. Power, once gained, must be used to ensure betrayal never succeeded. The sun set over Willow Creek as Chris reviewed plans for the company's next decade. Monroe Construction would continue expanding, absorbing competitors, strengthening its hold on global markets. Each new project would further bury the past beneath layers of success. James would eventually take his place in the company hierarchy, groomed to continue the Monroe legacy of power and retribution. The boy's parents would watch from their enforced poverty as their son inherited the empire their betrayal had helped build. That was Chris's ultimate victory, not just destroying those who betrayed him, but ensuring their destruction served as an eternal lesson. His revenge hadn't ended with their conviction. It lived on in every Monroe construction project, every business deal, every demonstration of power. Neil and Renee had tried to steal his company and destroy his life. Instead, they'd helped create something far greater, a dynasty built on the principle that betrayal carried infinite costs. Their suffering would continue as long as Monroe Construction existed, their story a perpetual warning to anyone who considered crossing the man who turned revenge into an empire. The lights of Monroe Tower illuminated the city as Chris finalized his plans. In the decades since justice was served, he transformed a regional construction company into a global force. Personal betrayal had become professional legend, private pain converted to public power. That was the true legacy of Neil and Renee's betrayal. Not the pain they'd caused, but the empire it created. An empire built on the understanding that trust, once broken, could never be repaired. An empire that would stand for generations as testament to a simple truth. Crossing Chris Monroe didn't just end careers or destroy lives. It created legends of failure that would be remembered as long as his success endured. The night settled over Willow Creek, and in his tower of power, Chris Monroe smiled. He'd achieved something greater than mere revenge. He'd turned betrayal into destiny, personal hatred into professional domination. The company that Neil and Renee tried to steal now shaped the world. While they lived in the shadows of its success, eternal examples of the price of treachery. That was justice, not just punishment, but perpetual consequence. Not just revenge, but eternal reminder. The betrayed had become the betrayer's nightmare, their downfall forever linked to his ascension. In the end, Chris hadn't just survived their treachery. He turned it into the foundation of an empire that would outlive them all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.